Sekhmet the Incomparable One, ancient goddess of Egypt. Sekhmet was known as the one who was before the gods were, as the lady of the place of the beginning of time, and the great one of healing. She was the most important of Egypt's leonine deities, yet she is the least studied and the most enigmatic. Her most familiar and repeated myth has myriads of interpretations, often contradictory. Of all of Egypt's female neter, or deities, she was the most significant manifestation of the Eye of Ra, embodying the seemingly contradictory but actually complementary aspects of danger and destruction, as well as protection and healing. She was known as the Mistress of Life. Statues of Sekhmet created by Egyptian artists are larger than life, over 7 feet tall. In some, she is seated on a throne holding an ankh, the Egyptian symbol of life, signifying her powers of creation. In others, she stands holding a scepter, symbolizing her native Lower Egypt. In all of these, she is regal and authoritative, the manifestation of female power. Seated or standing, the figures are compelling and resplendent with serene majesty. The representations of Sekhmet combine symbols that unite the entire cosmos. She is most definitely woman, her breast bare, her long fingers grasping the ankh. She is animal, with a distinctive squared jaw, round ears, and whiskers. She is a lioness, with a short ruff of the female lion framing her face. Lionesses are the hunters for the pack, embodying the power of the female to nurture and provide. She wears a wig and a ceremonial collar, emphasizing her association with royalty. Atop her head is the uraeus, the cobra poised to strike, symbolizing the manifestation of power. Behind the uraeus is the sun, in the form of a large solar disk. In this way, the uraeus harnesses and focuses the immense power of the sun. Sekhmet unites the strengths of human, animal, earth, reptile, and the cosmos. Sekhmet was associated with both the Eye of Ra and the Eye of Horus. In ancient Egyptian, Ra was the word for the sun, so as the Eye of Ra, Sekhmet was the eye of the sun. The Eye of Ra, stronger than all other deities, was always a goddess and was often cast in leonine form. The eye was associated with a number of female deities, including Sekhmet, Hathor, Tefnut, Mut, Mat, Bastet, and Wadjet. In fact, one of Sekhmet's many names was the sun goddess of the Ennead. Sekhmet was also referred to as the Eye of Horus, linked with healing just as Horus' eye was healed. Offerings were called the Eye of Horus, for it was the offerings that healed and restored the universe. Sekhmet's images are found throughout ancient Egypt, but the center for her veneration was at Memphis, on the border between Upper and Lower Egypt. She was honored in the Temple of Mut at Karnak, and the mortuary temple of Amenhotep III, where the majority of her black majestic statues reside. The Temple of Mut at Karnak was built by Hatshepsut, 1472 to 1457 BCE, the long-reigning female pharaoh. Hatshepsut demonstrated her veneration of this goddess, Mut, who characterized female possession of supreme authority, by building her a temple of her own to the south of the Temple of Amun at Karnak. At Karnak, Mut is seen as the power and integrity of the state, as female royal power deified. The name Sekhmet is derived from Sekhem, meaning power. Her full name means female powerful one. Her name is also spelled Sekhmet, Sekhmet, and Sekhmet. Ancient interpretations envisioned her as a destroyer and healer, with the power both to invoke and ward off plague and pestilence. Kings and warriors called on her for strength and bravery in battle. But essentially, she is the manifestation of power, particularly female power. As the Eye of Ra, she was a symbol of the heroism and strength that could protect the ruler in the face of rebellion. A crescent-shaped lake called an Ishiru surrounds the three sides of the southernmost end of the Temple of Mut. Found throughout Egypt, these sacred lakes were associated with the veneration of lioness goddesses. Possibly the Ishiru attracted lions with the promise of water, or highlighted the connection of lioness goddesses with water. This temple complex was modified a number of times and was in use from the 13th century BCE until the Ptolemaic dynasty, ending 330 BCE. The icon of a lioness head on a woman's body is primeval. Sekhmet most likely originated in Libya or Nubia, although a 30,000-year-old statue of a lion-headed female figurine found in Holzfeld Cave in Germany testifies to the timelessness of this figure. Sekhmet statues appear in many places in Egypt as early as 2400 BCE, 5th dynasty, and continue through the Greco-Roman period. The ubiquitous black granite statues of Sekhmet were part of the great number of construction projects and statuary commissioned during Amenhotep III's 38-year reign, 1390 to 1352 BCE. These projects are a testament to the fact that his rule was a period of prosperity and peace, and to his veneration of the traditional deities and rituals of ancient Egypt. It is speculated that he originally commissioned 730 of these giant statues of Sekhmet, 2 for each day, granting protection each day and each night of the year. The Egyptians carved her statues from diorite. Diorite is a black igneous stone whose fire-wrought origins affirm her connection to earth and fire, world and sun. High iron content in Egyptian diorite not only gives the stone a black color, but also adds to the sediment that contributes to the Nile's renowned fertility. For ancient Egyptians, the color black connoted 2 complementary aspects of the underworld: fertility and death. The link of the color black with fertility was underscored with the rich, fertile black soil of the Nile, delivered with its annual inundation. Black symbolized Egypt itself, as the word for black, Kim, is the root for the name of the Egyptian people, Kimamu, or black people, and the land, Kemet, Egypt, or literally black land. Often referred to as the Lady of Red Linen, Sekhmet wears a close-fitting dress that reaches to her ankles. The color red links the ideas of life and regeneration with fire, blood, and the ochre-colored funerary henna. The word for red, desher, formed the word desert, deshret, meaning the red land. In contrast to the black land, which was fertile and habitable, the red land was dangerous and unpredictable. Wrath, Desheru, associated with Sekhmet through the myth of the destruction of humanity, had its roots in the word red. Thus the color red was associated with anger and destruction, signifying the fierce nature of the radiant sun, and as such the color was used for the serpent amulets representing the Eye of Ra, the fiery, protective, and potentially destructive aspect of the sun deities. The color red also signified the beginning of life. When the yearly inundation of the Nile began, the waters looked greenish before they turned an opaque, dark, ruddy color from a type of red algae pushed out of the Central African tributaries, and downriver by the melting snow and floodwaters. Sekhmet embodied the wide range of meaning of the color red. There are relatively few myths mentioning Sekhmet, and the ones that do speak of her as the eye of Ra, the eye of the sun. In Egyptian mythology, the eye of the sun is a personage, a character which represents the concentrated and directed strength of the sun, and the eye is always female. The three myths about the eye interweave and overlap, sharing characteristics and differences. They are all found in different texts, so they should not be seen as linear or congruent. However, these stories provide an interesting and fuller portrait of the eye and Sekhmet. There is a certain amount of synchronicity within these myths. In the first two myths, the eye leaves Egypt. The eye creates humanity in the first myth and sets out to destroy humanity in the third. And the eye's return to Egypt in the second and third myths is heralded with fanfare and joyous festivities. In the first of these three myths, this version from the book of Smiting Down Apophis, the eye leaves Egypt and follows the deities Tefnut and Shu. Upon her return, the eye is enraged to find that Atum-Ra created another eye to take her place. Her tears of rage and grief form human beings. Atum-Ra then places the eye on his forehead as the uraeus, ruling over all. In the second myth, often referred to as the distant goddess, the eye leaves Egypt and goes south to Nubia. Ra realizes that he is powerless without the eye, so he sends an emissary to convince the eye to return. Through much storytelling, cajoling, and charm, the eye is persuaded to come back. Upon the eye's return, everyone rejoices, and a great festival is given in her honor. According to one text, upon her return, the eye has come to rest and has stopped in Ishru in her form of Sekhmet. The eye can be seen as the first feminine being, with the ensuing festival upon her return. In both this and the following myth was celebrated as the welcoming of a beneficial force for all of Egypt. The myth most commonly associated with Sekhmet is the destruction of humanity. From the Book of the Heavenly Cow, found on the walls of royal tombs from the 19th and 20th dynasties, around 1200 to 1100 BCE. This myth is considered to be one of the oldest ancient Egyptian narratives. The destruction of humanity opens with a group of humans rebelling against Ra, the aging solar god. Ra brings together a council of elder deities for advice. Among those attending is the Eye, who created humans. Nun, primeval chaos, suggests that Ra sent the Eye out against the humans who rebelled against his authority. The Eye, in the form of Hathor, goes to slay the human rebels who have fled to the desert. She slaughters the rebels and then returns to Ra, saying that she overpowered mankind, and it was agreeable to my heart. And it is here that Sekhmet came into being. Considering this, Ra decides that he does indeed want to rule over humans. Realizing that Sekhmet will destroy the rest of humanity, Ra has a change of heart. He commands his chief priest to grind red ochre to mix with 7,000 jars of barley beer, being brewed by women. On the eve of Sekhmet's planned destruction of humanity, the intoxicating draught is completed and poured into the fields where she will arrive. In the morning, Sekhmet finds the fields brimming with the red beer. Seeing her own reflection in the flooded plains, she is delighted and drinks her fill. She is then too intoxicated to even recognize humans, and the destruction of humanity is averted. She is subdued by an intoxicant because she cannot be subdued by force. Ra greets Sekhmet with the words, "Twice welcome in peace, O charming one," and decrees that every year women will brew intoxicating draughts for a great feast in her honor. The destruction of humanity story recurs frequently in Egyptian mythology, with different deities and different rebellions, which causes this narrative to be viewed as a repeating pattern of events. This myth shares many similarities with other myths that depict deities creating humans and then ultimately destroying them because they were dissatisfied with their creation. This supports the principle that a deity that is powerful enough to create life is also powerful enough to destroy life. And in this ancient Egyptian myth, that power resides with female deities. The eye is a symbol of power, the awesome and awful power of the sun. This power spans the destructive acts of creation and the creative acts of destruction. The power of Sekhmet is beyond the male god's control. She is a force of nature, wild and indiscriminate. Ancient Egyptians reenacted the myth of the destruction of humanity in an annual festival held in the first month of the year, immediately after the flooding of the Nile. These feasts are well documented at the Temple of Mut during the reign of Hatshepsut, and well into the Ptolemaic era. The temple inscriptions describe the continual singing, dancing, drinking, and music-making as acts of propitiation of Mut in her form of Sekhmet. This New Year festival occurred after the hottest days of summer had finally ended, the rains arrived, and the Nile flooded. Ochre-colored beer, brewed by women, flowed in an ecstatic ritual of propitiation to the power of the female divine. The flooding of the Nile brought the promise of the continuation of life in an annual cycle. The early floods would flush more clay, silt, and sand down the river, creating rich and fertile sediment. With the mythic identification of the Nile and menstruation, this festival certainly honored the power of the female in all aspects. As Ella states, Sekhmet embodies the cyclical blood that flows at birth and death, the blood that flows from mother to child in the womb, the blood on the battlefield, and the menstrual blood, or the blood of circumcision, that separates the budding young adult from childhood. Regeneration of the land, the continuation of life, was intricately tied to the cycles of the Nile. It is the cyclical red flood of the river Nile that became equated with the red, renewing menstrual blood that cleanses and prepares the way for renewal and regenesis. This blood is a kind of communion in which humankind partakes of the divine drink of the gods. That is the mystery of transubstantiation. The New Year festival was one of the primary transition periods for the ancient Egyptians. Sekhmet was invoked and propitiated as her immense power could be wielded in many directions. A recitation of a spell called the Book of the Last Day of the Year was performed over a piece of cloth, which was then worn as an amulet during the days leading up to the new year. Prayers were recited to gain the protection of Sekhmet, and tokens of Sekhmet and Bastet were liberally bestowed. The clergy of Sekhmet, the Wab, were famed as healers and surgeons. One of the few surviving ancient Egyptian medical books, the Papyrus Ebers, contains many spells written expressly for the use of the clergy of Sekhmet. A comprehensive knowledge of the heart and circulation was attributed to the Wab. The heart reflected the solar attributes of regeneration. Heart scarabs, placed on the chest of the deceased, manifested the revitalizing powers of the sun, aiding the transformation of the deceased. Some heart scarabs were made of carnelian. This passage from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, beautifully translated by Normandy Ellis, refers to the stone's regenerative and solar qualities. Mine is a heart of carnelian. I am the phoenix, the fiery sun, consuming and resuming myself. The devouring one, warrior goddess, protectress of the divine order, lady of jubilation, and the beautiful light. Sekhmet, the divine manifestation of the lioness woman, encompassed all of these aspects. She was called upon by queens and kings, warriors and healers, priestesses and priests for her strength and power. She was truly the incomparable one.